Assalamu alaikum, sister. Thank you very much. Beautiful speech. I just wanted you to talk a bit more about the anti-war movement. The reports we've got here is that the comments by George Galloway were pretty much ridiculed by the wider media, certainly by Tony Blair. And it was very disheartening that after all those marches and demonstrations, the war still went ahead. And so what progress, what hope is there?
The Stop the War coalition was absolutely devastated when the war began because, as I say, more than 2 million of us marched in London, 5 million in Italy, millions more across Europe, 500,000 in Berlin. And I believe that Australia and New Zealand, you had your own marches as well. Okay, we didn't stop the war, but I'll tell you something now, we saved lives because the Pentagon and the military strategists had to change their modus operandi. They had planned to bomb every town, every city, every village in Iraq for 40 days and 40 nights to soften up the country before they sent in the troops. We know that more than 100,000, and this is a conservative figure, more than 100,000 innocent civilians have been slaughtered by George Bush and Tony Blair's bombs since the start of the war. I was speaking to a Sheikh Majid al-Ghaud in Fallujah a few weeks ago, and he said that their estimates are that the figure is nearer 500,000. But the anti-war movement goes on. It's very, very active. And the backbone of the movement is supplied by the Muslim community in Britain, by the Muslim Association of Britain. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims marched alongside hundreds of thousands of people from the left, socialists, people from the right, people from all walks of life on February the 15th, 2003. And as I say, we didn't stop the war, but I'm sure that we saved lives. And what we have done is we have ensured that Britain certainly will no longer go into any military adventures with George Bush, because if Blair dare take the army, the British Army, into any other military adventures, any other illegal wars, we in Britain will not only march, we will riot and we will bring him down.
With all due respect to your experience, as well as to the power of a lot of Muslim women and the kindness of a lot of Muslim men, a lot of Muslims in New Zealand, or from our experience, have arrived as refugees from the Taliban. And so I wonder how you would answer to a lot of women in this room that have suffered under the Taliban for what you've been saying about your personal experience, you were a Western journalist there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's a very good question, and I have actually met some Afghan women who did flee the Taliban. I met them in Christchurch, and they listened to my story, and they thanked me for it. The reality is that the Taliban were no more brutal than the previous regime, and certainly this regime leaves a lot to be desired. For instance, the prison where I was held, I returned, I've been back to Afghanistan 4 or 5 times, and I went to it, and it is jammed with young girls aged 12 to 16 whose only crime is that they've run away from home because they don't want to be sold off as child brides, a practice that the Taliban had stamped out. And these child brides are expected to marry men twice and 3 times their age. Yes, the feared Vice and Virtue squad has gone, but in Herat it has been replaced by another equally odious group, loosely translated, it's called the Chastity Squad, and these are pulling in young girls aged 12 to 16 again and having them internally examined to see if they are still virgins. There are no career women emerging from the rubble of Afghanistan. There are a few little green shoots of hope, but that's about it. Karzai made such a big deal when he announced that Seema Sama was to become the first Afghan women's minister. I went to Afghanistan in February 2002 to interview her. I couldn't even find her. The Karzai government hadn't even given her an office in the government building. It was all lip service, and she was eventually hounded out of that position in the summer with death threats. The only success story in Afghanistan at the moment is the production of opium, which has made Afghanistan the #1 heroin producer in the world. The city where I was held, Jalalabad, now has hardcore porn for sale in DVDs in the front windows. These are, I live in Soho, London's red light district, and I can tell you now, these DVDs wouldn't even be sold under the counter in Soho, but they're in the front windows in Afghanistan. What we have given the Afghan people is drugs and porn, and I'm no doubt sure they've got the rock and roll as well. One of the most respected charities, Médecins Sans Frontières, pulled out its entire operation with great reluctance last year after half a dozen of its people had been murdered near Bamyan. They knew who had carried out the murder, somebody closely related to a friend of the Afghan government, and there was a refusal to hold an investigation. And that is why Médecins Sans Frontières pulled out of Afghanistan. And it was an excellent charity as well. Hamid Karzai is laughingly called the mayor of Kabul because he's lost control of his country outside of the capital, and the Taliban are coming back. They're in control in certain provinces in Afghanistan, and I can tell you something else. When I have traveled around Afghanistan, quite a few people, including the women, have said, we wish they were back. Now, I'm not a supporter of the Taliban, but at least under the Taliban, there was security. That security has gone. And the other thing that the Afghan women tell me is, will the West please drop this obsession with the burqa? Tell us how we can get our children educated. Tell us how we can put food on the table. Tell us how it can be safe for me to walk down the street without being raped. Tell me how, never mind about turning me into a career woman, how can I get my husband a job so he can work to put food on the table? When you've sorted this out, then we'll talk about the burqa. So don't for one moment think that Afghanistan is a success story. It's an absolute nightmare disaster where 20,000 American soldiers are committing war crimes on a weekly basis, and innocents are still being slaughtered in that country.
As you are a converter to Islam, how would you express the jihad to non-Muslims?
How would I explain jihad?
Jihad to non-Muslims.
My own personal jihad is my cigarettes. I'm trying to quit. Jihad is a struggle.
Sister Yvonne.
There are many levels, but that is my jihad at the moment.
My question relates to your time as a